Greetings everyone, in this video we're going to be painting up the Communicant anti-tank hunter from the Trench Crusade. I'll also be sharing a quick and easy Grimdark skin recipe along with some verdigris weathering. I'm Nate the Feral Painter and welcome to the video. Greetings everyone and welcome to the first video of 2025. I can't believe we're here already. It's been fast, hasn't it? I don't know if it's gone fast for anybody else, but 2024 was just a blip and a blur in my eyes. Anyway, let's get into the painting of this video. So to start with, I've obviously primed the miniature and then given it a zenithal prime of white from above. And you can use any method for this. If you want to use an airbrush to prime it, or if you've got a rattle can, get like a black rattle can primer, prime up your miniature, and then maybe using a white primer rattle can from above, give it a zenithal highlight. My preferred primer of choice for this are the Stynalrez primers. Now, because we've actually primed it in white, what this will enable us to do is actually filter and tint the skin with some more recipes that we'll get into a little bit later on. And this is just, it works great for, I always like to prime, especially when I'm doing like grimdark skin on a weird, awful, it's not really a zombie, but something along these sort of lines. I like to start with these grey white primers as my main skin tone and then filter them and move into some other effects a little bit later on, which will completely transform the look of this skin. And speaking of filters, the first filter that I'm going to apply to this is actually a contrast paint, which is Dark Oath Flesh, and this is where you can get creative. So I've gone for more of a warmer skin tone here, but if you want more of a purple or a blue or a colder tone, this filter part is what's going to really transform the look of your skin. So if you do want to get creative and experiment with some different colors, you can do that as well. But the trick here is to apply it from like a reverse zenithal. So we've done the zenithal from above, but with this filter we're going to apply it from bottom upwards, and what that'll do, it'll catch all those shadow areas, leaving those highlights at the top. And just work your way around, like tilt it to an angle so you're coming directly from below, and just start to spray and build it up from below. Again, don't forget you can experiment with these colors, and if you want to get even more creative, you can maybe do one half of it in one color and another half in a different color to create some unique lighting effects. Immediately after this, we're going to come in and add some mottling and pitting to the skin, and as we start to move up the skin tones of this recipe, some of these will appear as though they are sat underneath the skin, breathing a little bit more lifelike and realism into this monster's, or whatever it is, into the person's skin. And to achieve this, I've just loaded up some Citadel's Druchi Violet onto a brush, and using a needle, paperclip or a cocktail stick, you can just start to speckle and flick this around the miniature. Again, if you want to get creative, you can change up the colour of this, and you can even use multiple colours to create an even more realistic effect. But you'll notice as we zoom in, it just creates these tiny little specks on the skin that you would probably see on one of these creatures roaming the battlefield. And now we can start to paint the rest of the miniature before we move into more of the specialized techniques that we're going to use for the skin and the rest of the armor. And speaking of the armor, I gave everything a base coat of Scale 75's decayed metal, and then to highlight this armor, I'm going to dry brush some Pro Acryl bronze, and then atop of that, as one final highlight, paying special attention to more of the light areas, like the top of his hip areas, and then any of the knees and some down towards the feet. I gave them a dry brush of Army Painter's Fanatic True Brass. For his gun, I base coated in Scale Colour 75's Heavy Metal, and then atop of that I gave it a highlight of Rung Fang Steel. Again, these silver metallic areas don't really matter. If you've got some Citadel paints, all you need to do is use Iron Warriors or Lead Belcher as your base coat, and then you can dry brush a brighter silver on top of that as well. And the reason I like to dry brush my highlights on is that it leaves these microscopic marks behind, which when you're looking at a miniature in this scale, it can read as little scratches on the armor itself. To finish off the rest of these base coats, his pouches where his bullets are kept, these were just given a base coat of Rhinox hide, and the bullets were base coated in AK brass. Now once that has dried, I'm going to give a unifying wash all over the miniature of a contrast paint rattling grime. Now the reason I like to do this is one, because it's an acrylic and it's going to, and being a contrast paint, it's going to leave this more matte strange look. I can't really explain it, it's one that you have to like look at to be able to see what I mean by this, but it just adds a little bit of depth. It's not like going in with none oil or anything like that, but it does create some shadows, and it also tints the armor into this more like grimy, awful area. But I am applying this to the entire miniature minus the skin, so like his helmet, his gun, and the lower half of the miniature is going to get this treatment. And I do apply a little bit of water to this, so I'm going to mix it 50-50 with water. And I know traditionally contrast paints should be mixed with like the contrast medium, but because I want it to just flow into the recesses and be a little bit more prominent in the recesses rather than doing what contrast paints do to the entire area, that's why I use water for this process. Now once all that has dried, we're going to come in with Villainy Ink's Goons Grime as a unifying wash across the entire miniature. Now I know I speak a lot about the Goons Grime, and I presume a lot of you who watch my videos on a regular basis do know how to do this quite often, but it's the removal application that's important. There's a couple of things about the actual application itself that are important to this skin recipe. Now I'm applying it through an airbrush. Again, you can do this with just a standard brush application. There's nothing stopping you doing it and you will get the same results. I've just done it for speed and coverage through an airbrush, and I've thinned it 1-to-1 with mineral spirits, and I'm being very delicate where and how I'm applying this. So around the skin areas, I'm just giving it a thin coat and a light dusting across the entire skin areas, and then down towards the lower half of the miniature I'm just applying it a little bit heavier to build up some natural dirt and grime on this miniature. Now I do speed up this process in the drying using a hairdryer, or you can just let this naturally dry, and once it has done that, this is where the removal part of it becomes a little bit different than what I've previously explained. Now the armor sections and like the gun and everything like that is just a standard removal application using a Q-tip or a sponge, and I'm just dabbing away with some mineral spirits just to reactivate it and then cleaning it up with the other end. Now when it comes to the skin, this is the important bit that I did want to speak about. I'm going to switch to a brush. Now the reason I've done this is so that I can control that grime on the skin a little bit more different, and because Villainy Ink's Goons Grime does have a bit of a granular effect, it's going to add and lean more into that like pitting effect that we've got, whilst also tinting the skin into that dark brown and giving it that grimdark look. Now what I do is I load up some mineral spirits onto my brush. I'm not oversaturating it, I'm just getting enough on there so that I can start to reactivate that enamel. And I'm just tapping it and dipping and dabbing it here and there, and then this is where you can get creative and just play with that grime effect. You can just move it about and create and just like dot it everywhere, and this will result in like the actual Goons Grime, the enamel pigments spreading out a little bit, and it leaves behind this very strange like unique effect. And it's hard to explain, you'll be able to see it more in the video. And I'm just working my way around, just doing this little dabbing effect and pushing the pigment here and there where I want to be able to do it. And if you do need to come in with a Q-tip, if it's a little bit heavy in some areas, you can just simply dab away that, and if you need to reapply any more, you can do that as well. And I also do add some streaks into this, like he's got some little bits of streaks where he's been sweating or whatever and it's been dripping down his body. But that's the key here to this application and removal, is to apply it light, and then with the removal process, rather than just dabbing and just pulling it off of those highlight areas, leaving it in crevices, I'm actively manipulating and moving that grime about, which will lean more into like the pigments of his skin, and where some of it might look like it's got some different shades to it, especially when they're in these trench warfares. And he's obviously some sort of weird demonic creature, and these guys are always going to have this sort of effect on their skin. Again, I'm going to give that around 15 minutes to dry before we can move on to the next part. This is where the fun begins and we can start to add some special effects to the skin, and for this I'm going to be using Villainy's Carrion Crimson, and specifically why I've chose this one is because it's a special effects enamel, and what it has is these tiny little pigments and particles inside it that are a little bit more bigger than the granules what you would see in such as like goons, grime or any other of the enamels, and this can really again start to play into that pitting and freckling and mottling of the skin. But I'm only applying this around some of the like sore areas, or if you've got a miniature that's got like some cuts or some areas that are a bit gnarly, you can apply it to those as well. And I'm just again pushing those little pigments about, and you will notice that it can soak into the crevices, and you'll notice on the video that I do go in and like pull these back out, so I don't really want it to leak into the crevices. I want it to be more like a tint around the actual sore areas. He's got like these little holes on side of his body, and it's just around these areas where I'm going to apply the actual Carrion Crimson. And once that's dry, it will dry to a satin to a glossy look, which plays perfectly into some surface finish variation where it's got some dry skin, and then like the pusses and all like these weeping parts of the pores have started to come out on these areas of like blood or whatever this creature's got going off with him. Now we're going to turn to the rest of the miniature to finalise some of the weathering, and around his gun and some of the silver metallic areas I've just come in with Dirty Down's Rust, and I'm just applying it very sparingly here and there and putting a bit on my wet palette, thinning it down with some water, letting it run into some of those crevices just to add a little bit of rust and decay to his actual gun itself. And then for the brass or like this goldy dark armour that he's got, I'm going to add some verdigris, and again I'm using the Dirty Down's verdigris effects. And if you do want some more tips on using these products, because they are water soluble, you don't need mineral spirits or anything like that to use them, I have got like I think it's a Dirty Down's like Rust Masterclass on here, and the same principles do apply to the verdigris because they're pretty much the same project. They're just different tinted colours, or they're just different pigments that are inside them, but they both do the same thing. If you add a bit of water to them, they go lighter. If you put a bit more on top, then they go a little bit darker. And I just start to add the verdigris all around the armour, and you'll notice with this one as well, I don't know what it is with the verdigris, but it tends to clog up your brushes quite a bit, so make sure you are using some old brushes for this. And here and there I just add a little bit of water, and I'm quite playful with it. Some places I'll add it a little bit heavier, some places I'll thin it a little bit more, like run into crevices. But when it says not to use a hairdryer, but I like to use a hairdryer with mine, just to speed things up a little bit, and it tends to lighten them up a little bit more. You'll notice it can go quite strong, but the nice thing about this, just as we do with the enamels, to remove it back off, you can just get like a sponge and start dabbing away at it to remove it in those areas. After that, to push the verdigris even further, or just to add some general chalky, matte, awful decay to this miniature, which is what I really wanted to add to him to make him look like he's just covered in death. And for this we are going to be using Villainy's Decay of Death, and this will dry really matte and chalky, perfect to apply around the lower half of the miniature. And again with this, use a blow dry if you want to speed it up, and this will help with the chalkiness. And the nice thing about this as well, if it's a little bit too strong, because when you first put it on you don't think it's going on really strong until it dries, and it's like, oh Jesus, this is actually quite a strong effect. But you can actually blend it, and I just get a Q-tip or a sponge with nothing on this. This is just a sponge with nothing on it, or your brush, and just dab away at it, and this will just help it blend in or knock that effect back a little bit more. Now the final thing that we are going to add to this miniature are some ichors dripping from his like little circles that he's got going off in his skin. I'm not sure if these are like implantations or if it's just the way he's formed, I'm not quite sure. But either way, all I did was get some black paint, and I mixed this 50-50 with gloss varnish. And if you don't want the black ichors dripping out, you can simply go for the gloss varnish itself, and this will create some wet pustule looks coming from the actual holes themselves. But I just go around and actually streak them down and get them dripping down his body, and it'll just add that one little last bit of detail that'll stand out on the skin. And you can see really with this skin recipe, it's quite simple. So just straight from a zenithal prime, we've barely done much to the skin. We've not added like a base tone, a mid tone, and then a highlight. all we've done is just filter that skin a little bit, added a couple of special effects on top of it, and hey presto, we've got some Grimdark looking skin. And the nice thing about this recipe is you can change the colours in it, and this will result in a different looking skin. Now, all the products that you've seen in this video are available in my affiliate links below, so if you do want to pick up some of these paints or anything like that, then the links are in the description below. And if you are interested in the Trench Crusade itself, or you want to check out some more of their miniature lines or some of their factions, then over at the Grimdark Compendium, each one of our team members is working our way through to a dedicated course for each of these 6 factions. Now, I've hit this off with the new Antioch miniatures, and the reason why I've chose to paint this miniature today is because this guy in the rule book is actually, he can only join the new Antioch and the Trench Pilgrims. But if you are interested in those courses, then click the link in the description below to pre-order yours now. And they do have a current sale on at the moment, so make sure you don't miss out on that as well. My new Antioch course is currently out. In episode 2, you'll actually see how I created the base for this miniature. And that brings us to the end of this video. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've been able to take something away from it, you know, with like the skin recipe and just altering a few different things to completely transform the look of your miniature. And until next time, guys, because we've got an absolute banger coming out, and this is going to actually be a busy month for this channel. I've got a video planned which I can't really speak about at this moment, and obviously if you watch my previous video from that on the 25th of this month, we finally got the Lionel Johnson tutorial coming out as well. So I've been Nate the Frontal Painter. I'd like to thank you for coming along, and guys, because it is 2025, it'd really help me out if you could hit it off this year with a bang and hit that like button, comment below, subscribe, all that sort of good stuff to help me and the algorithm push this video out there. But until next time, guys, I will catch you in the next video.